This is Shannon Grady, and I'm with Palmetto Politics, and that over there is my co-host.
John Cummings, hello.
Good to be with you guys today. We have a packed hour today. I'm starting to joke around with John that maybe we need to do either a whole nother episode or we need to extend our episodes because, folks, it is getting real. If you are not aware, March is March Madness for a couple of reasons. One, it's basketball March Madness, and John can certainly attest to that. John, how many games have you covered in your lifetime during the March Madness month?
During March, well, not as many because depending on how far you go in the tournament, I mean, it can end pretty quickly. But in my career, as far as doing Division I college basketball on television and radio, probably between the women's and the men's programs up in Fairfield University in Connecticut, about 1,000 games.
All right. Well, so March Madness, 1,000 games, that is pure madness. But, folks, it's also madness for a different reason altogether with, and that is it's political madness because the month of March is typically reserved for parties to reorganize and reelect leadership for the various state and county offices. In the South Carolina, this is definitely the month in which we host what we call reorg, which is just short for reorganization. And so I've had a couple of people tell me that they're a little frustrated having gone to multiple meetings about reorg and leaving the meetings with no more understanding than they had before they went in. So I just want to give you a teacher's abbreviated PowerPoint. Boom, boom, boom. This is what reorg is. Here in South Carolina, we call the leaders of our various precincts executive committeemen. Some other places they call them precinct leaders or other things. So here in South Carolina, it's called an executive committeeman. Now, when the county party says this is when the reorganization is going to be, it'll be sometime this month, and then they'll tell you what time, and they'll tell you where this process is going to take place. There are multiple, I think we have over 100 different precincts in Horry County alone, and so we can't possibly get all of those precincts in one place at one time, so they'll have to spread that out over a period of time throughout the day or days. And what'll happen is you'll find out, okay, I'm in Socket C3. I live in Socket C3. So they'll tell me, hey, your reorg meeting is on this date and at this location at this time. So I'm going to show up at that location. I'm going to go in the front door. They're going to say, hey, let me see your voter ID. If you don't have your voter ID, they're going to say, pull it up on your phone. You just go to scvotes.gov, put in your name, your social, and all that. It's going to pull up your information. And all that does is verify that, one, you're a registered voter, and two, that you are at the right precinct. Okay, once you've verified all the information, you can go have a seat at your precinct table. They'll have a little table designated for the folks from your precinct. Once everybody's in and they haven't got anybody else waiting in line to have a seat at the precinct tables, there's going to be a folder on the table. In that folder is going to have a Form 2 and a group of Form 1s. The Form 1s are going to be passed out to everybody at that table. They're going to fill in that information. The Form 2, you can quickly do a vote and say, okay, we've nominated John. You're going to be the guy that fills in the Form 2 while we're running this particular meeting. So John's the president at that moment. Okay, so John's going to fill that in. What you're going to do on your Form 1 is you're going to fill out where you're at, what precinct you're in, your address, blah, 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 all these kind of things. And then you're going to get to offices for the precinct. You can have executive committeeman, which is the most powerful position because it's the ones that's going to be doing the voting during the party meetings throughout the next 2 years. The second most important position is president because in the absence of the executive committeeman, the president can then vote in their stead, or they, of course, can write a proxy for someone else. Then you have a secretary and a treasurer. And those are pretty much the positions that you vote for within your precinct. In addition to that, you have county delegate seats. So if you want to be a delegate to the county convention, which is where it is determined who will be the county chair, you're going to put yourself down to be a county delegate. Now, for example, in Sockasty, there's usually about 15 delegates slotted for that precinct. Okay, so if only 8 people show up, you don't need to hold a vote to see who's going to be the county delegates. All 8 people get to go. However, if 17 people show up and you've only got 15 slots, you need to hold a vote. 15 people will win, and 2 people will be alternates in the event that somebody can't go when the convention rolls around. Then the next thing is going to be county state delegate. So let's say you want to run to be a state delegate, which is you go to the state convention and then you determine who's going to be the state chair, currently Drew McKissick. If you want to be a member of that delegation, you need to put down that you want to run for state delegate. That will not be determined until the county convention. So it just puts your name on the ballot at the county convention. That's how that works. Once all that is done, everything is voted on. You've decided who the EC is. You've decided who the president is. John's going to write all that down on that form too. You're going to turn that into the folks there at the reorganization event. They'll take all that information, and you're done until it's time for you to come back and meet at the county convention if you've elected to be a county delegate. If you didn't want to be a county delegate, you don't have to come back for the county convention. That's optional. But I would absolutely implore you to please come to county convention, because that's going to determine who's going to be the leader in the county. And we want to have good people at the leadership position of chair, vice chair, and of course, state EC. That's the nuts and bolts of it, folks. It's that straightforward. It's no more complicated than what I just said to you. That simple. If you have any questions, you can certainly email us or comment down in the comment section, and I'll reply to you with clarification on that. But there's really no need to go sit through another hour or 2-hour meeting to have somebody stand up there and tell you the ins and outs of reorg. I just did it for you. I just summarized it. And how long did that take me, John?
5 minutes and 50 seconds, pretty much.
Yeah.
Now, just for clarification, if you decide to run, can you run for multiple positions?
No.
EC, state, or county?
If you're going to run, you can be an EC, you can be a precinct EC, and you can run to be a state EC.
Right.
But you can't run to be a state EC and the state chair or the party chair. You can't do that. Okay? Right. You have to pick one of those county positions.
But I mean, at that initial meeting, when you go to your precinct for the reorg, and you want to run for EC, you can also throw your name in for county, not the county chair. I mean, county delegate. Multiple positions.
You're confusing things, John. Stop it.
Well, okay.
Okay, folks.
So I'm trying
everything John just said. Forget everything John just said. Let me go back and tell it to you really simple.
All right.
You want to be a precinct EC, you can be a precinct EC. Let's say that you're the only person that shows up to your precinct. Nobody else even bothers to show up. You can then be the precinct EC and the precinct president, okay? Because there ain't nobody else. You're everything, all right? You can then choose to run to be a delegate for the county convention, and omnis, you're that delegate because there ain't nobody else there. You can then also choose to run for a state delegate. Now, if there are 5 positions and 10 people show up, one person cannot say, I'm running for all of it, and you have to vote for me. That's not how that works. Now, if nobody else wants to run, again, you have the option to be all of those things. But the more people that get involved, the more opportunities you have. Now, when you get to the county convention, you cannot run to be the chairman of the county, the vice chairman of the county, and the state EC. You got to pick one of those. You can't run for all 3. Now, you can run to be a state delegate and run to be the chair, or run to be a state delegate and run to be the vice chair, or vice versa. Those things you can do, but you can't run to be the chair, vice chair, and the state EC. They can't be filled by one person. So does that kind of clarify a little bit more what you're saying, John?
Yeah. So the most important really is to get to these meetings.
Yes, please get to the meetings.
Please get involved.
As soon as we know when they are, we'll let you know. We don't know yet. They haven't said yet. So we'll
get involved. I think the more the merrier.
Yeah. The 13th is when they're having a meeting to determine when and where these reorg processes are going to take place. As soon as we get that information, we'll get back to you. Now, today we do have a special guest that's going to be joining us at about 10 a.m. So before we get to her, she is coming in. Her name is Elena Moore. She is from the Palmetto Judicial Watch, and she's going to be talking to us about exactly what kind of sneaky and underhanded things are taking place at the State House right now, today, at this very moment while we're talking. There are some committees meeting, and you know what, John? This is a shocker, but they're not actually putting this video out so everybody can see what's going on. They haven't started the live broadcast. I don't know what's up with that, but they don't want us to know what's happening. So, a couple of things that folks need to know. There is a gentleman by the name of Jonathan Hill, who was a former House representative from South Carolina. He resigned, or not resigned. He didn't run again. He chose not to run again, but he's doing some other things. And one of the things he's doing is each Monday, when the House is supposed to put out their agenda saying these are the bills that we're going to be voting on in the various committees, he puts together a list, and he calls that list bad bills. And then he highlights the name of the bill and who's sponsoring it, and what the problem is with that bill as he sees it. So this particular week, we had House 3295, which was presented by Collins. It's a competency in education bill, based education bill. That's listed as a bad bill. Tommy Pope has put out House 3360, the Center for School Safety and Targeted Violence bill. That's a bad bill. And H 3726, Merle Smith, Statewide Education and Workforce Development Act, bad bill. Suspension of hunting and fishing license. What in the world? Okay, Hickson. Bauer put in Women in Hunting and Fishing Awareness Day. Can we stop with having all these? Really? Really? I think this month is Women's Awareness Month. Well, you know what? Somebody put a meme up, but it's spot on. I'm sorry. How can you have Women's Awareness Month when you can't even determine, Biden, what a woman is? Stop it. And I don't want that crap coming into South Carolina. So that's a no for me on Women in Hunting and Fishing Awareness Day. No. I've known how to hunt and fish my entire life. I don't need you to have a day to celebrate me being able to do that. Delegation powers over Edgefield Water and Sewer Board, Working Agricultural Lands Preservation Act, Clementia C. Pinckney Hate Crimes Act. I can only imagine how ridiculous that is. Again, we talked a little bit about this hate crimes bill last time. And John, you mentioned your thoughts on what you believe about hate crime bills, and you just share again with the viewers what it is you, as a former law enforcement officer, how you feel about hate crime bills.
Well, yeah, they're really in the long run counterproductive. They put pressure on the prosecutor to try to prosecute additional charges that are really unnecessary. It does create specialty groups. We're all for equal treatment under the law in the United States. I mean, that's in the 14th Amendment, equal treatment under the law. And when you start to separate groups, that causes a big problem. I think personally that those laws, the way they're written, are unconstitutional. It's just that nobody has chops to challenge them, because then you look like, you're against hate crimes.
Right.
I think
You're
they're the ultimate. Yeah, it's the ultimate political attaboy. Look at me. I'm against hate crimes. Well, nobody likes racism. Look, I love those things in the end zone at the NFL games. End racism. It's the ultimate duh. Right? Duh. And racism. Thanks. Thank you. It's like
Exactly.
it's like putting up breathe air.
Right.
I mean, we
Make
kind
sure
of
you breathe today, folks.
right. So I mean, when you get to the to the nuts and bolts of it, if there are groups that are targeting other groups simply because they're in a group, well, look, then you have conspiracy charges you can add. If you can add RICO charges, if possible, you don't need, to add an additional 5 years to the penalty because somebody said bad things when they were stomping somebody. To
Right.
me, it's just mindless. And like I said, it's the ultimate exercise in political attaboys. I patted myself on the back. Look at me. But in reality, since they've introduced these types of legislations and passed them into law, hate crimes have gone up.
Yeah.
So there's deterrence to it. So why are you passing it?
Right. Well, and then they have another one on here that Hyde has introduced, is House Bill 3799, and it's called Water Professionals Day. So I don't know. What are
Yeah,
we celebrating? Surfers? Are we celebrating fishers? Boats? I don't know. What does that even mean? And
plumbers.
why? With
Yeah,
all the things going on in our state and in our country, you're
well, I think,
wasting people's time with Water Professionals Day.
I think the average person needs to realize that. I know at the federal level that less than 5% of bills that are introduced actually become law. And very often what legislators do, no matter what the level is, state or federal, they'll introduce legislation knowing full well that it has absolutely no chance of being passed into law. But when they go to run for re-election, you can always put up the fact that, hey, I propose legislation that helps seniors. I propose legislation that helps STEM programs. I propose legislation that helps the environment. I propose legislation. Well, how many of your bills got passed? Well, not a lot. And probably because if you're in the minority, it's very difficult to get a bill passed. That's just the nature of the beast. But that's why so many of these bills get introduced, because you have to make it look like you're doing something. So very often these things go nowhere. And a lot of what, if you go onto the website, the South Carolina website, the legislation website, basically what you'll see is a lot of the things that are introduced are basically resolutions, declaring a certain day for a certain group, or recognizing someone by naming a street after them. And that's all well and good. But a lot of the bills that get introduced go absolutely nowhere, and they're just there for notoriety's sake.
All right. So let's take a look at just a couple of these bad bills. Jonathan Hill is so kind to, he does like an abbreviation of, this is a summary of what the bill means and why he thinks it's bad. So we're going to take a look at House Bill H 3360, which is the Center for School Safety and Targeted Violence. This is put forward by Tommy Pope. And he says that the bill establishes a Center for School Safety and Targeted Violence within the State Law Enforcement Division, SLED. So we're out of creating an entirely new organization within an organization. I'm not really keen about that, because as a Republican, I like small government, not big government. Anyway, to provide extensive training, education, and expertise in the fields of school safety and targeted violence. The impact of this fiscally is about $3.5 million. The objection to this is that, one, it grows government. We just said we like smaller government. SLED anticipates a need for 6 new full-time employees, equipment, operating expenses, and a capital project needs to establish a center at a cost of nearly $3.6 million. And it's a non-government. Alternatives do exist. There are already private individuals and organizations available to provide this type of consultation and training of school districts. A better plan would be for the State Department of Education to provide a list of these resources to districts at no additional cost to taxpayers. I'm all for that. I think the training is a good idea, but why do we need to build another organization when they already exist in less expensive alternatives? Another one is the competency-based education, and we're both educators, so we're certainly keen to check out anything like that comes forward. This is House Bill 3295, put forward by Collins. This bill enables K through 12 schools to implement competency-based education, or what's commonly called CBE. This is a system of instruction where students advance to higher levels of learning as soon as they demonstrate mastery of concepts and skills, regardless of time, place, or pace. The fiscal impact is still pending. We don't know exactly what that's going to cost us. The objections are that this is a failed policy. CBE education is simply an evolution of outcome-based education, which failed miserably in the 1990s and was rejected wholeheartedly by parents and myself, an educator and a parent. Computer systems have made it easier to implement this style of learning system, but CBE has failed to deliver better education in states that have implemented it, such as Maine in the mid-2010s. Cognitive science could explain the failure. A research paper asserted in 2017 that unless students have stored important facts in long-term memory, they haven't learned them in a usable way. It's sort of like if you memorize the answers to a multiple choice test, you regurgitate all that information, you didn't really learn anything, you just memorized it to take the test, and then it's gone because you didn't actually use it in any kind of practical way so that you can then carry that information on with you later. So letting students choose their pace also runs afoul of cognitive science because the thinking needed for learning is so fatiguing that students need the equivalent of a trainer in the gym to help them keep on pace. I do think that there are times when you have students, and I use my son as an example. My son is a more advanced student than your typical student. And so there are certainly times and situations where if he were in just, say, a gen ed class, and they're working on basic algebra and he's already passed that and he's into trigonometry, I don't think that makes sense to have him continue at that particular pace. But that's why we have different courses. We have honors, we have gen ed, we have honors, we have AP, advanced courses, IBS, all these different things. I think that takes the place of needing this pacing guide, if you will, as they're trying to illustrate it here. So
yeah, and I think that's so important, honors programs and making sure that students get addressed at their particular level. If you're in a gen ed, you can, guess what? You can work your way out of that. There are some people who just don't have the foundational abilities to do that. I mean, some people get a late start. Some people don't have the attention at home that they need. And you can work your way out of gen ed. I mean, we were in education for a long time, and I knew plenty of kids that started out at the low end and ended up being honor students just because, one, they worked harder, and two, they got access to the things that they needed. But as far as honors and AP classes, it's very, very important to keep those in place. There are movements all over the country, particularly in urban areas and particularly in New York, where you have the left eliminating honors programs because they're just getting rid of them, and they don't want other kids to have their feelings hurt because they're not in the honors program and this person is. I mean, that's just mindless because you're going to throw everybody into the same pool. And we've said this for a long time, at least I know
Equality.
I have. But this is not a one
Diversity, equity.
It's not a one size fits all issue. Everybody learns differently. And that's one of the challenges as a school teacher, to figure out who learns this way and who doesn't. But to eliminate programs because they hurt the feelings of other students, hey, that should be motivation if you're in a general ed. If you want to work hard and get out, get out. But if you want to lay back, go ahead.
You're not being very inclusive. Come on, man.
I know, and you know what? The big problem is that certain groups sued because they got discriminated against up in New York because they were dominating the higher end schools, the specialty schools that you had to pass an exam to get into, and the Asian American community was particularly targeted. So they sued.
Now, by the way.
Yeah, it depends on what day it is. Right. It depends what day it is, but I mean, to do that is just mindless. So they're getting rid of these honors type programs and honors schools, if you will, and they're just throwing everybody into the same pot. And look, like I said, education is not a one size fits all program. It's just not. Everybody learns differently, and I mean everybody learns differently. Every
Yes.
individual learns differently, and as a teacher, you have to figure out what those differences are so that the child can succeed.
Right. That was one of the things that it was easier for me. It came easier to me because I was a 3-part learner. I had to see it, hear it, and do it. Now they've got, even more than that, but we'll just stick with the 3 that I learned. And now they say there's 4, but primarily if you're a person that you can see it, you get it, you can hear it being, how explained to you and you understand it, or you can actually physically involved in it and you get it. To me, that's the same as I am. So I tried to do those 3 things in every lesson so that every student had an opportunity to learn at their particular style. But I also gave my students at the beginning of the year, I gave them the little test to determine what type of learner they were, how they learned best. And so that was helpful. But yeah, I think that's very important that you have those classes, as you said. Not everybody intends to go to college. Not everybody needs to go to college. And you don't have to have a college degree to go out and make lots of money. It's just not necessary. We don't even have to point out, Bill Gates, Zuckerberg, and neither one of those are guys that I particularly am fond of, shall we say, but they demonstrated that they didn't have to have a college degree, and they've done quite well. Yeah. And then, of course, we talk about plumbers and electricians.
Sure. I mean, I taught high school for 22 years, and I taught juniors but mostly seniors. And that was the one of the good things about where I taught was that we didn't always stress college to students, not to certain students. We had guys, it was an all boys school. We had guys that were bright, but school wasn't their thing. You knew for whatever reason, they just couldn't sit there. They couldn't stand it. They didn't like the books, whatever. They needed a hands-on type of training. So we tended to push them towards trade schools and whatever they liked. I mean, like I said, I had kids that did very, very well in school. They were very bright, but it wasn't just school wasn't their thing. I'd have guys come back and visit me, guys who struggled and went to school and became x-ray technicians. And when they came back to visit me, they were making way more than I was making.
I know.
We had other guys go to trade school for automotive repair, and then they got into fixing the computers in the cars. And those guys, one of my guys came back. He was making over $100,000 a year. Worked for BMW. He was making over $100,000 a year, and they gave him a car.
Yeah. That's not too
and he wanted nothing to do with college. So it's not for everybody. And one of the impressive things about South Carolina's education system, and there aren't a lot, let's face it, we're pretty low on the poll there. Right. But one of the impressive things is that the ability to get yourself a technical degree is pretty strong. The technical school system down here, when you get out into the junior college level, is really, really strong compared to a lot of other states. And it's quite impressive, especially compared to New York. I mean, it's just you're going to have to pay a lot of money to go to technical school if you live in New York. Down here, you have places like Horry, Georgetown, Tech. Those are excellent places to start. And if you want to move on from there, that's great. But you can do very well, and it's one of the real strengths down here in the education system. But you know what? We need to get kids there.
Yeah. Well, one thing I wanted to speak with you, John, is South Carolina is actually not that badly ranked anymore. We're in the middle of the pack now. There's lots of other states worse than us, and I would even argue that some of the states that are ranked better than South Carolina have questionable ranking because in South Carolina, we recommend everybody take the test. Everybody takes the various practice scores, if you will, not practice, but they call them SATs and things like that. They're all taking them. There are multiple states where they only let the top 10% of their students take those tests. So obviously they're going to be skewed towards looking like they're a much more effective school system than South Carolina.
I wish there was a way. Yeah, I wish there was a way to measure how students did when they went professional. When they became professionals, when they got later on into their careers. There used to be, there's a college rating system. Everybody knows U.S. News and World Report rates all of the colleges. But for several years, Forbes magazine did a rating as well. They don't do it anymore. But one of the things that Forbes concentrated on was what was the earning potential? What were students making when they graduated from that? And I thought that was such an important thing to have in there. But Forbes stopped doing it and they just go with U.S. News Report, and they don't really look at that. And I think that's really an important thing to look at.
I remember that as well, John, and I thought that was a great way to kind of look at systems of education and to determine what's being successful and what's not. But of course, that did not really favor universities, quite frankly,
No, it
because
didn't.
like
Yeah.
you said, you could go to the technical school and get a great job. I give my nephew as a great example. He's a brilliant, actually, all of my nephews are brilliant, and that's test scores off the charts. But the youngest of my nephews, Brandon, he actually never had any interest in college, wasn't interested in that at all. But he was a brilliant mechanic. Now he's in high school, and he gets a job working on the big rigs that carry the 18-wheelers that carry this stuff around. And his senior year in high school, they made him the supervisor over guys who were 25, 26 years old. That's how good he was. They did it based on the fact that it would take this one guy 3 hours to do a task, that they would give that same task to Brandon. He would do it in 45 minutes. He just had an understanding. He was recruited by NASCAR. They wanted him to come work on their sports engines. The only reason he didn't do it is because they said, you got to go to Tennessee to the school that we have down there. And Brandon is a homeboy. He's a bit of a mom's boy. And he was like, nope, not leaving South Carolina. I'm not going to go. Then he got recruited by BMW. And they said, listen, we want you to come work on our high performance engines. Everything will be great. It's right here in Greenville, South Carolina. And he was like, okay. They said, but first you got to go to Germany. As soon as they said Germany, he said, nope, not doing it. So the kid makes plenty of money. Don't get me wrong. He's very successful. Before age 27, he owned his house. He had a car, a truck, a boat, an airplane, his pilot's license. I mean, there's not many 27-year-old kids that you can say that about. And he just has a high school diploma. He doesn't have any extra college. So there you go. You don't need to have extra college, and you can be he's very intelligent. Brandon's extremely smart, very good with his money. So I'm super proud of him. I'm proud of all my nieces and nephews, but I just always think about, he's a great example of, you don't have to go to college to make big bucks. And sometimes, I mean, he's making way more money than I ever did with all of my education. But anyway, so that's a good point. Now, one of the other bills we're going to talk about before our guest comes on is Statewide Education and Workforce Development Act that was introduced by Merle Smith. It says it's going to coordinate Council of Economic Development with the Department of Commerce to the Department of Employment and Workforce. Well, Council of Economic Development, where have we heard that? World Economic Development Forum? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I don't have to go past that to know that I'm not going to like this bill, because it sounds too much like what we're hearing at the national level with this idea that, we send people to the World Economic Forum. Well, I mean, John, do you have any redeeming things you'd like to note about the World Economic Forum?
Probably not. I think that the free market, for the most part, if it is free and fair, and there's an emphasis on fair there, I think it provides all it needs to provide. And I don't think you need a bunch of people to tell you how it works, because sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. Yep. I've taught that for a long time. It's buyers and sellers. So if you have something that people want to purchase, some service, a good, I mean, I'm not going to go into the basics, economics 101. Well, then that should work. You don't need councils of people to tell you how that works. And the idea that you need a council of people to get together to get these other groups to work together, I don't see why. They should be working together anyway. And it shouldn't be forced. I mean, this is an idea that should have been taken care of a long time ago. You shouldn't have to force people to work together to do these things. They should be doing it anyway.
I agree with you 100%. One of the things he says here in terms of objections to this bill is that it infringes on the rights and liberties. This office will take South Carolina another step towards socialism with state central planning of education, workforce, and industry inducements, and it'll all be funded by taxpayers. Again, this is House Bill H 3726, introduced by Merle Smith. I could not object to this more strenuously. Let me just take a look here. Let's see if we can't look up Mr. Merle Smith and see if I have his score in terms of how conservative he is or is not.
Yeah, and like I was saying, I think you should need the government to get involved in this. I would think that, companies, you mentioned BMW. I would think a company like that would want to make sure that they have a continuous flow of qualified people to work for their company. So if BMW wants to do some outreach with schools, that's great. I think that's awesome. But why does the government have to get involved to set all these things up? They don't. So,
Exactly.
if private corporations want to get involved in county school districts and provide internships, and that's a great thing. But you shouldn't need the government to do that. That's just good business.
Right. Yep. I'm looking here and I see that Merle Smith is from Sumter. He represented for District 67. And according to CPAC, his conservative ranking or score rather is 55%. And as we noted, 80% and above is considered conservative. So he is basically a liberal, you know, so not terribly
Well, it's,
surprised.
like you said, it's big government. I mean, that's government is not the answer to everything. It's usually the problem with most things. So,
Okay, I'm looking to see. Eliana should be joining us here. I'm going to double check with her again.
I think it's amazing how the free market has been misinterpreted for such a long time. The one thing that people always forget about is that within the free market, there's supposed to be an inherent fairness, and it has to be a level playing field. And I
Right.
think people forget about that. And one of the advantages to being in the free market is that you have companies that look to schools and go, hey, how can we maximize our pool of candidates to come and work for us? And you shouldn't have the government interfere to tell you to do that. That should just be the free market operating and providing these opportunities. And that particular company, be it BMW or anybody, that particular company wanting to broaden their workforce possibilities. So, no, there's no need for it, in my opinion.
Right. Well, I've just messed with Ali, and she's going to be jumping on here in just a second. So what we're going to be talking about with her is something that kind of was. I hesitate to use the word nefarious, but I'm not really sure what else to say. I mean, Jonathan referred to it as a sneaky tactic. Normally on Mondays, the House puts out their agenda for the week, what bills are going to be before the committees and what things are going to be talking about in the week ahead. But this particular week, they omitted, and you can see this just came to me this morning, and this is highlighted at the bottom. They omitted a very important piece of legislation that was going to be discussed, and it's House Bill 4066. It is sponsored by Brandon Newton, and it is called the State Party Convention Size and Apportionment and the Discouraging Primary Election Challenges. So we are having a lot of questions and issues about our state party and the way that it's running. She's now joining us. I'm going to go ahead and bring Miss Ellie Moore on. She is with Palmetto Judicial Watch. Good
Hi.
morning.
Good morning.
Elena, how are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Well, great. Elena, I was just going to kind of do a quick synopsis, if you will, of this bill that Jonathan sent to us, and then I'm going to let you kind of just tell us what you know about it. And I know your work is pretty much in following all of these different laws and bills as they come forward in the House and the Senate. So we're talking specifically about House Bill 4066, presented by Brandon Newton. And it's the state party convention size, apportionment, and discouraging primary election challenges. And John and I have both been candidates. I was a candidate for county council, and John ran in New York against the infamous AOC. And neither of us were successful, but we both took away valuable lessons. And so this is something that certainly interests us as having been in the campaign mode, if you will. So this bill caps the number of delegates at the state party convention. It consolidates the authority to hear challenges of county and local primary election outcomes with the state party executive committee, and enables the executive committee to require candidates to post a bond before challenging a primary election. Now, some of the objections that Jonathan kind of highlighted here, he said, one, it's unconstitutional. Under Article 3, Section 17 of the South Carolina Constitution, it requires that bills address a single subject, not multiple subjects. This bill addresses two unrelated subjects, one being the state party convention delegate numbers and apportionment, which is under Title 7, Chapter 9, and the other is procedures for contesting a state party primary, which is Title 7, Chapter 17. He said separate bills should have been introduced or needs to be divided so that you have either strike Section 1 or you strike Sections 2 through 5. And then he goes on to say that it reduces accountability because under Sections 2C, 4, and 5, it will eliminate the existing process for appealing the decision of the state party executive committee and replaces it with two important restrictions. The first of which, it now must be appealed directly to the state Supreme Court. And number two, the state Supreme Court may not consider any information outside of the minutes of the executive committee's election contest hearing, which puts the decision on who decides what evidence can be considered by the judges in the hands of the party secretary and the executive committee effectively giving the party the ability to sabotage any realistic chance that a candidate may have for a successful appeal. I just want to pause really quickly and say that we recently here in Horry County had some things taken before a magistrate judge, and there were multiple questions asked about the number and the quorum, if there was a 2/3 quorum, whether they had quorum or not. And the secretary that they had appointed for that meeting was not, she was present, but she was not called upon to share that information. And when asked by the supposed chairman what was the quorum and what was the number, his response was steadily, "I don't recall." So what's going to happen if we get to a situation where someone wants to appeal and you get a secretary like the one they had at that event who says, "Well, geez, I don't recall. I didn't write that down. I didn't put those in my minutes. Seems like a big problem." And then he goes on to kind of say, the intent of this seems clearly to be to stop all primary challenges, because the last thing it does, and I know this would have curtailed a lot of people in this area that did have some challenges in the primary, and you and I talked about this on the phone, it raises taxes, because Section 2B allows the state party executive committee to require candidates who challenge the outcome of a state primary election to post a $5,000 bond, which is refundable if they win, but not if they lose. So this is, in his opinion, an unreasonable form of taxation. So, Ms. Moore, what do you think?
I think there's a lot of things covered in this bill, and the hearing actually happened this morning.
Yeah.
It started at 9 a.m. and Chairman Drew McKissick spoke in favor of the bill.
Of course,
and some notes. And we can definitely go over those with the bill pertaining to the bill. I think that they're definitely taking care of, it seems, of deterring primary hearings. And that is on both sides of the party lines. This is for both state parties, both Democrat and Republican. But in here, there were multiple challenges that happened in the 2022 primaries. And there's not a specific piece in the Code of Laws of South Carolina that states that the primary hearing needs to be contesting it for the reason of overturning it, because that was something that was brought out within the primary elections with both Harrison Musselwhite that ran for governor and Lauren Martell that ran for attorney general. During those hearings, they were limited to 20 minutes to provide evidence of fraud over a statewide election. And there wasn't even going to be, if I recall, a court report or even a transcript. Miss Attorney Lauren Martell, asked multiple times for one to make sure that there was going to be one there. So we actually had a record of what was happening. And there were multiple people that showed up to this hearing and they tried to go in, but they locked a ton of citizens out of South Carolina that traveled across statewide to share their documents and their personal witness to the fraud that actually occurred in the election violations, because people simply wanted to show that there were issues with the election, not specifically that someone had won, but that there were significant fraud that shouldn't go unresolved. Right. And so they tried to show that to the SEC. The SEC directed them to the GOP because the GOP is the one that runs their primary, just like the Democrat Party is the one that runs their primary. So there were multiple things that happened. So the 2020 primary contesting hearings are usually used more than just, I was the one that actually won the election, not the other person. So this is eliminating a lot of different issues being raised to a party that runs their own primary. And in the bill, Section 2, so they talk about the delegates. The delegate allotment is the first thing. And you went over that a little bit, that talks about how they're just downsizing and limiting the amount of delegates that can happen, because currently state party delegates are based off of the population within that county.
Right.
And now it is limiting it to no more than 639 total delegates. Today in the hearing, Chairman Drew McKissick said that with the current population growth, it would most likely be above 900 or something to that effect. So this would be capping it. He said the delegates have been on autopilot, was his exact words. So that is why since the 60s and 70s. So that is why they're trying to limit it and put it to a specific number. So that's the first part. The second part of all of this is the hearings, like we were talking about. And that's really the part that is outlined the most and changed the most in this bill. It's section 2B, where it talks about, like you mentioned, the surety bond, to where they can be, any contested primary can be, they may charge the actual challenger up to $5,000. And if they win, they get the money back. If not, they lose that money. And then on section 2C, this is the part I think is the most interesting. It talks about how the appeals to the decisions of the state executive committee must be taken to the Supreme Court on petition. And so the state Supreme Court will first have to choose to hear the case. And then in this law, it outlines that it can only, the information that goes into the state Supreme Court, if they choose to hear the case, it has to only be based on the record of the hearing from the state executive committee, and it must be granted first priority by consideration of the court. So it's outlining very specifically what has to take place in order for that to happen, in order to appeal the decision. And even if you get the appeals, you can only bring in the information that came in at the state, at the hearing that took place at the contest. And I think it's really important to point out that part, because within the hearings of Harrison Musselwhite and Lauren Martell and a few other county level people that ran, they were only given 20 minutes to provide their case. There were over 50 individuals that showed up to testify what they saw, what they experienced. There was even, computer experts there to talk and show of the malfeasance that happened within the 2022 election. So this is completely taking away and giving the state executive committee the decision of what they're going to hear, when they're going to hear it, how they're going to hear it, and which parts of it they're going to hear.
So who gave the determination they only had 20 minutes? Is that something that's written in party rules that I'm unaware of? Because I looked through the rules. I didn't know that was a 20-minute was a kind of the thing, or was that an arbitrary amount of time that they selected?
So within the bylaws, they can, I know specifically within the GOP bylaws, it gives a lot of the power to the chairman. In the code of laws, it gives a good amount of the power to the chairman as well. Yeah. So it leaves it up to the chairman's discretion. And Chair Drew McKissick was the one that stated it was going to be a 20-minute limit.
So folks, you just heard it. Our own chair, Drew McKissick, limited the amount of time these folks had to actually share their experience at the voting polls to 20 minutes, even though they've driven from all parts of the states, experts in various fields, true voters who had actual, nefarious malfeasance, whatever you want to call it, occur in the process when they went to vote, simply wanting to come and share their experiences. And I love what you said, Ms. Moore. This should be something that we absolutely want to fix. It's not that they were pursuing this because they had some hope that the outcome of the election was going to be changed. It was simply for them to say, listen, we've got problems in our election process. We need to fix this so that in the future, this doesn't lead to the need for a overturning of an election. Is that correct?
Absolutely. That was the biggest point of it. And both Harrison and Lauren said that multiple times within their hearing, because it kept coming back to, oh, you're just trying to overturn your election. And the executive committee men were the ones, questioning and were very coming forward with saying that, well, they're trying to, overturn it and you don't have the evidence for it. And multiple times they said, every single time, this is not because we're trying to overturn it. This is because there were major issues with it. And we're just trying to show you what those issues were so they can be fixed and there can be a safe, secure general election.
Now, Ms. Moore, how many, if I may, how many of the issues, if you know, with Ms. White's election in particular, how many of the issues were because of computerized voting? Was that the big part of it? Were there problems with the computers? Because there's been so many elections where it hasn't been an issue. There's malfeasance, but a lot of it is just issues with the computers that don't work. That causes irregularities. How much of this can be avoided without the computers?
There was a huge portion of it being the machines, but there was also a huge portion of it actually breaking the South Carolina state election laws by those that were running the elections, the poll workers, poll managers, people within power. And there were a lot of people that weren't even trained well. We can say it was their fault and they were breaking these issues, and they definitely were breaking election laws, and it was documented by numerous people. But it was as if they weren't being trained correctly, and so there was a huge issue with the election machines. There definitely was. There was a lot of documentation of that, but there was also a enormous amount of issues that were just very blatant breaking of the state election laws.
Yeah, I know here in Horry County, we had some serious concern about the lack of training or the quality of the training of the poll workers and poll managers. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed. Now, again, John and I are both retired educators. And I hate to say it like this, but I've been to so many meetings and training sessions, if you will, led by the party, that as an educator, and I was an administrator, I was a principal. So a lot of my time was spent going into classrooms and observing and trying to determine, where any deficiencies may have been in the classroom or in the instruction techniques. So having that experience sitting into these meetings, I'm just sitting there going, oh my God, I'd be failing you left and right now. You're terrible. This is awful. You're not reaching anybody, and half the room's already asleep and they don't understand what you're saying. And so I feel like we need to have better people doing the training. And there are lots of retired educators across the state who I feel would be adequately capable of going in and doing these training courses rather than some of the folks you currently have. But it goes back to, are you friends with Drew McKissick? Are you friends with the guys, the powers that be? And if you are, then he'll let you go do this. If you're not, I was told personally, point blank, by Mark Benoit, who is, I forget what his actual title is, but he's one of the folks up there with Drew McKissick. And he told me in a discussion that, quite angrily, in fact, that nobody knows the rules more than I do. I know the bylaws better than anybody. And I said, okay, Mr. 27-year-old man, I got you. I'm twice your age, but I guess you know more than I do, even though I've been dealing with Robert's rules and parliamentary procedure longer than you've been alive, but roger that. So it's that mentality that I think leads to this problem. My thought process is, okay, I understand to some degree you want to mitigate how many people are pursuing truly having the vote overthrown because they think they didn't win, they think they should have won and they didn't. Can't we distinguish those two? Can't we have one system for those individuals who are trying to change the outcome of the election? That's one form of election challenge. And then let's have another form of election challenge that says, we're not saying we have enough votes to change the outcome, but we want to identify serious problems that occurred in the election process. That's a separate type of election challenge. I think those two should be completely dealt with on a different level. And in terms of this bond, I'm opposed to that, to the extent that $5,000, again, seems arbitrary to me. And it does seem like it's more of a penalty to prevent people. I would be much more likely to accept if they simply made it, when you go to run for office, like I ran for county council, I think my fee was $675. I think that's just from memory. So if they wanted to say, okay, Ms. Grady, you think you won and the vote was wrong. If you want to appeal that, then you have to pay the $675 again. If you win, you get that back. If you lose, you don't get it back. I'm not even crazy about that, to be honest with you. I think the appeals process should be what it is. However, I understand they want to try to limit how much time and energy is spent with frivolous attempts to change the outcome. Does that make sense? I mean, is that completely unreasonable?
I tend to agree, personally speaking. I think that even as statewide candidates, you have to pay a couple $1,000s, and I think I cannot remember the fee off of the top of my head.
Usually 1% of what your salary is going to be is what they typically make it.
Right. And so, it is for somebody that is just running and is not a political operative or a political person, or has been in politics for a long time, and they're just running out of the goodness of their heart because they want to change the laws, and they're just a normal citizen. They're not going to have the funding to be able to pay all of these fees, because there's a lot of other fees that these candidates have to pay in order And so, and as I'm sure both of you know, it takes a lot out of you.
Yeah.
So I think, on here, it's really showing who can run and who can't. But of course, that's my personal opinion. I'm just looking at it with Palmetto State Watch. We're looking at a lot of the laws and the legalities of things and the facts of the case. And within these facts, I think it's pretty straightforward, what the motive is. And if these laws are very vague because they're leaving it up to those checks and balances, but as we're seeing, there's not as many checks and balances as there used to be. And so I actually wrote an article about all of this early this morning, kind of breaking it down even more, which y'all can see at palmettostatewatch.com. And I go through the similarities that we saw within the 2022 protest hearings, within the 2022 state convention. And honestly, we're seeing a lot of the similarities with the loyalty oath that the Freedom Caucus chose not to sign, and also the loyalty oath that Ronna McDaniel, the RNC chair, is now instituting on the Republican candidate debate side of it all. So it's even, having other people on the national level, which, I would like to remind you, the person who was just made vice chair of the RNC is Drew McKissick.
Drew McKissick.
Yep.
Wonder where she got that idea from.
I don't know, but there is a lot of coincidences, and I personally am one that does not believe in coincidences.
No,
I'm going to have to agree.
Ultimately, Elena, don't you think it's just because I think this is a nationwide problem? They're just trying to dissuade grassroots politics. They want establishment politics, and they want to be able to limit who can get involved in this. Now, having someone have to pay $5,000 to look at an election for a seat that pays $10,000, it kind of dissuades people from getting involved. It really does, and I think they limit grassroots politics all over this. Would you agree?
I agree. And, I think there's a lot of issues within the state of South Carolina and across the nation that we're seeing, that there not only is a lack of transparency when it comes to our elections, but it also is a lack of audibility as well. And that's why the South Carolina Safe Elections has brought up a cast vote records lawsuit against the SEC and 8 other counties, trying to preserve the cast vote records of the 2020 election, because that's how you audit the information. And this is a lawsuit that is not just in South Carolina. We're seeing this across the nation right now. And so, there's different ways of trying to secure your election and audit your election and make it transparent. But how are you able to do any of that if you can't even raise the issue to the party or the organization that's in charge of the election?
Right. Yeah. If you're being put in a position where it's financially impossible for you even to raise the question, then the question is not going to get raised, and it's certainly not going to get answered. And so the problem is just going to get kicked down the road, if you will, and potentially snowball into a much larger problem at a later time. I find I'm more and more disheartened with party politics in that it seems a lot less democratic in nature. And I don't mean like Democratic Party. I mean like democratic principle. Yeah. We're moving away from the constitutional values that our founders tried to create here in this republic. And I don't understand why a person like Drew McKissick would want to advocate that you strip away liberties from voters. We already are so limited in what we get to choose. Let's be honest. If you don't get involved in the primaries, then you have zero say in who the candidates are. Zero. And there's such a small percentage of voters who get involved in the primaries. And there's an even smaller percentage of people who get involved in the party. And that's because it is purposely done that way. Like this month is reorganization for the party. That should be something that the state party spends money advertising. They should be saying, here's where your precinct is going to be. This is where your county, this is when they're having it. And I have seen no emails about it. I have seen nothing on the TV. I've heard nothing on the radio to suggest that that kind of information is being widespread. How can you expect the people to get involved if you don't tell the people? And I believe that's purposeful. They want to keep it small so it's more easily managed, and they can keep the same people in the positions of authority time and time again.
That's why it's easy to keep constituents and citizens ignorant of what is actually happening, because ignorance is very easy to manage. And that is why, with Palmetto State Watch, we are always looking to expose corruption, create a legal foundation, and also educate citizens, because that is the problem. No one is educating our citizens. And one thing that I say a lot, especially with the GOP Democrats or whoever says, well, you're wrong, you're stating wrong, what I always say is, go look at it for yourself. Anybody that is listening, any citizens out there, go look at the code of laws for yourself. I want you to make the decision of whether or not this is a good or a bad bill. I'm simply informing and showing you what I see in the facts of the case. But please double check. Please look at it, because we need individuals to get involved. And that is why, the founding fathers created the Constitution as just normal citizens. They were farmers, they were pastors, they were normal individuals, and they were tired of England dictating everything and holding all of the power.
Yeah.
So within it, that is why we have all these checks and balances. We have the judicial, the executive, and the legislative branch. But when you give one of those branches too much power and you section it off to just a few elected officials, you start to see that power being usurped. So that's why it is so imperative that people get involved and start actually reading these bills. And if, someone is raising an alarm saying, whether it's on the GOP side, the Democrat side, a grassroots side, whatever side you want to be, go and look for it. Go and look at it yourself. Because at the end of the day, if you see it and you know how to talk about it, that's the best you can do.
Yeah, well, thank God for groups like yours. And that's really the reason why Shannon and I are doing this. We started this podcast about a month ago. And the reason that we're doing it is because we're trying to bring awareness to these pieces of legislation, because Lord knows the media has no interest in this whatsoever. In fact, they're a big part of the problem. They're not going to cover any of that. They'd much rather tell you about, some small thing that's local, and they don't cover anything when it comes to politics unless they're told to cover it.
Right. They're focused on Alec Murdaugh right now. That's their whole focus in the world. For a long time, it was the balloon. It's anything but what's happening. Andrew Breitbart famously said, all politics is downstream. It's local. Starts local. And if you look at even at our U.S. congressmen, our U.S. senators, most of them, I'd probably guess 90%, maybe even upwards of 95% of those individuals started out at a local level. They were a mayor, they were a council member, they were a state representative, they were a state senator, and then they made their way up through the ranks and became a U.S. senator or a U.S. congressman. Now, that's not 100% true. There's certainly exceptions to that rule. But largely, they all started out in a local political environment and made their way up. So if we can get rid of some of these bad politicians at the local level, they don't ever have the opportunity to go and ruin things at a national level.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you mentioned the Murdaugh case, because I've been doing some of my own research over the past few years, following along with that case. And you would be surprised how much the Murdaugh case connects with a lot of other people that are involved currently within our government. Mm-hmm. And so, there's always a little truth to everything. And so I always like to kind of, see what it is raising awareness of, because I always like to say that, if something's happening at a specific time, if there's a big event or a revelation, look at the time that it's coming out on and what else is happening around it. Because there's a lot of other key players doing a lot of things right now that are connected to people in the spotlight, like the Murdaugh case. And some of those things are good, but there's a lot of bad things happening right now. And so that's why I always suggest you do your own digging. Palmetto State Watch, we're going to keep on covering as much as we can and reporting as quickly as possible. But there's a lot out there, and in the day of information.
Always be suspicious when they say, "Hey, look over here." Look the other way. There's a reason they told you to look over here. Always.
Absolutely.
So, Ms. Moore, give us one more time that webpage where folks can go and check out more information from the Palmetto Judicial Watch.
It's palmettostatewatch.com or .org. It goes both ways. And we're on all social media, different platforms. Telegram is usually the place we update first. We do interviews with a lot of people. We just recently did an interview with expert Dr. Walter Doherty, who is even testifying the Carrie Lake case. He's testifying for the South Carolina case as well when it comes to the cast vote records. And it breaks down really the importance of secure, audible elections and exactly what is happening in the state of South Carolina and the movement across the nation, because a lot of things are starting in South Carolina right now. It's very interesting. And this is let me tell you one thing. I'm a native of South Carolina. My entire family is from there. Absolutely. And I'm so proud to be one, because there is a lot of things stemming from this state, whether or not you hear it on mainstream media. So we're always updating there. We are always trying to get a network of individuals. So if any of the listeners are ever interested in getting involved in creating a network within their own state and their community, definitely reach out to us. And we also have a newsletter, a weekly newsletter. So sign up for that. And we just, we're looking at becoming that legal and educational foundation for South Carolina and be South Carolina's premier watchdog group, because it's lacking severely.
Yes. Well, it has been fantastic having you. I really encourage folks to go check that out. Palmetto State Watch, not Palmetto Judicial Watch. Judicial Watch gets in my head, but it's Palmetto State Watch.
Similar. Yeah.
And so we're definitely going to take a look at that. I appreciate so much you coming on, and I hope to have you back on again, because this is not going to be the last time that we see some questionable bills go before the House. Anything you would like to share, John, before we wrap up?
No, that was great. Thank you for coming on, Elena. It was so informative. We appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, folks, that's going to do it for today. We appreciate you stopping by. I know a lot of you guys don't have a chance to watch it when it's live. You watch it later. So if you have any questions or concerns, don't hesitate to email us, palmettopolitics@gmail.com, or comment down in the section below the podcast, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.